Hey guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another video. Today we have a review of a discontinued gem. And you know what? It's very interesting having a YouTube channel and doing these reviews for you guys because I found out that in life, you really have to kind of know yourself and you have to know your strengths, your weaknesses, what you're good at, what you're not good at, and play away from the weaknesses and towards the strengths, right? And I can sometimes be the most stubborn person in the world. There's no doubt about that. I am kind of a bludgeoner, and I can just put my head down and plow through, right? And in YouTube, sometimes that's a good thing, and sometimes it's a bad thing because the stupid algorithm keeps telling me you need to do more top tens, Ramsey. That's where the views and clicks are at, and I'm like, fuck you, algorithm. Although I did agree to do some top 10. Someone made a very good point. They were like, you keep doing all these huge, drawn out, long lists, but then we don't really know what your top 10 are. And I was like, well, you can just go to the top 10 in that huge list, but it may be easier in its own video. So maybe one day I will go back and do some top 10 videos just to have them. But it can also be a hard thing to do, to kind of put your head down and just trudge through and plow through, because a lot of times these older fragrances that I want to talk about, people just don't care about. But who cares? While the other channels are racing and rushing to kind of get their newest review of Penguin out or whatever the newest fragrance is, I can just kind of keep trudging along, keep doing my thing. And today we're going to talk about a discontinued fragrance from Tom Ford Private Blend. Unfortunately, it is in that path of this hyper release, this hyper speed thing that these houses are in, where they'll release something and then discontinue it instantly if it doesn't sell like hotcakes, which I absolutely despise that business model, but that's just the way it is nowadays. And this is called Tom Ford's Vert d'Encens. And as you can see, there's a couple things we'll talk about, and one is which I got myself this decant probably 4 years ago now, maybe 5. I think it was 4 or 5 years ago. And I got the decant. I was like, damn, this is full bottle worthy. And then I couldn't find it, and not at a price I wanted to pay, right? Not at a price I was willing to pay. So I sat on it, and I just waited and waited and waited, and finally I found a bottle for $100. And the reason was, this guy said his daughter took the Tom Ford plate off of the top and stuck it to her phone. And he was like, I'm so sorry about that, man. I'll give it to you for $100. And I was like, I don't give a shit about the Tom Ford plate. Absolutely, I'll take the bottle. So patience is a virtue. Patience is key when hunting down vintage perfumes. I mean, if you've got the dough and spending $300 or $400 or $500 doesn't matter to you, you can just go to eBay and probably buy a bottle right now at 10 times the price it's worth. But if you wait and you're patient, sometimes you will find opportunities like this. So basically, Vert d'Encens very simply translates to green incense. And one of my favorite notes in perfumery is incense. And I'm here to tell you, boys and girls, that this is exactly what this fragrance is. It is literally green incense. It lives up to the name. It does exactly what it says on the tin that it will do. So let's talk a little bit about the line that it came out in. So apparently, Tom Ford in 2016 decided that they were going to do like an homage, an interpretation, what Tom Ford called new interpretations of the classic green notes in perfumery. Okay, so they released 4 fragrances back then that were supposed to be in this line. All 4 are discontinued. Okay, and you hear almost no talk about them. I went for this one. This is my favorite from the line, if you will, because of the incense, but I would love to talk about and do videos on the others for the channel. I just don't have any juice. So it was Vert d'Encens, Vert de Bois, Vert Bohème, and Vert de Fleur were the 4, apparently. And Vert d'Encens specifically is supposed to be represented, a scented representation or interpretation of the coast of Corsica. So shout out to Napoleon. Sophisticated, aromatic, and wild. The composition includes notes of incense, pine, resin, fir balsam, heliotrope, and woods. Now, we have a variation in the perfumer. I actually don't know who the perfumer is, but Olivier Gillotin is listed as the perfumer in Fragrantica. However, if you go to Parfumo, it lists Yann Vasnier and the Maisondieu husband and wife combination, which I believe they're now divorced, but I think at the time when this was created in 2016, they were still married in a husband and wife duo. Antoine Maisondieu and Shyamala Maisondieu, which is a hell of a name, by the way. Shyamala, I love it. She actually was the one who went with the guy that did the book on the Ghost Perfumer. She traveled with him to Pierre Bourdon's house in France. So that's a badass book. If you're a perfume head, I would urge you to read it. But so yes, there is a discrepancy between parfumo and fragrantica. Just something I thought I should mention. Okay, so the fragrance basically starts out. Well, let's do the notes. According to Parfumo, which I prefer, it's fir balsam, frankincense, pine resin, heliotrope, tree sap, basil, boxwood, cardamom, lavender, bergamot, jasmine, and lemon. Okay, so the jasmine and the lavender are the notes that are sort of most in the background to me. They're probably there. I don't pick up very much lavender. Sometimes that happens with lavender. Sometimes lavender is more of a note that you feel rather than really smell, right? So to my nose, this fragrance opens up much more sort of green than smoky. The smokiness tends to come a little bit later, but think about the color green, okay, in perfume. Symbolizes what? Spring, rebirth, another season, another chance to live, the triumph of life over death in winter, right? And so it's like looking out onto this landscape, and you get this sort of imagine you're looking out at this landscape, right? And maybe you're on top of a hill, and you see like the grass outside is like one color, and you see the leaves on the tree is another shade of green, and you see the plants out far in the distance, that's a third shade of green, and so forth and so on. But it's this beautiful green lush landscape, and you're going to walk towards it. You're going to walk down the hill. You're going to walk towards this landscape. And when the quote unquote incense note starts to come in, it comes in almost instantly to me. It's like an instant blend of green with all of these different interpretations and this very oily, lemony incense. This is where the lemon at the top really makes its name, because it doesn't smell like a lemon note like you would normally smell, but it ends up literally smelling like you're smelling unburnt royal hijari incense. Okay, I have some. It's amazing smell just by itself. I mean, it has this lemony, fresh incense like smell instead of the black, dirty, burnt smell, right? The ashy smell. It's completely different than that, and that's how this starts off. It starts off with that sort of fresher, oily, and it's very oily on the skin. When you first spray, you're going to actually feel like the fragrance smells oily. Very similar to, actually a good comparison would be, imagine if you took out the tobacco and just used the oily sort of incense resinous feel of Royal Tobacco by Amouage. I have a review of Royal Tobacco on the channel. You can check it out. I would love a bottle of Royal Tobacco one day. It's on my to-buy list from Amouage. It's on my never-ending to-buy list. But I really enjoyed Royal Tobacco. I thought that was one of the better fragrances that came out under the Fishman. And just imagine if you kind of took the tobacco and the fenugreek and some of the other weird parts of that fragrance out, which I enjoy the weirdness, but and just focus on that oily, resinous, piney, green-smelling incense part. Okay, so that's a great comparison if you're familiar with Royal Tobacco. Okay, so it starts off very green, and the incense note starts off very fresh, and it's an extremely attractive opening. Beautiful opening, I must admit. From the beginning, I was hooked to this fragrance, and it's remarkable. I mean, it's a remarkable example of what I think Tom Ford needs to get back to. I think they need to get back to doing stuff like this in the private blend. You know, Tom Ford sold out officially the whole brand to Estee Lauder, and it just feels like the creativity and, trying to do something in this type of perfumery is in the past. I mean, this is 8 years ago now. This is 2016. The 2007 to 2016 time frame, I think, is kind of the meat and potatoes of the Tom Ford private blend release. Once they started releasing stuff like Fucking Fabulous and all that stuff, it was kind of all downhill from there. But this is I think a fragrance that really touches these different layers and different shades when you wear it. So these different pastel colors of green kind of come to your nose, and it's almost like the fragrance is like born in front of your eyes. By the way, I've got a 2-hour dry down here. I could do a fresh spray. It's a very strong fragrance though, and I'm going to go to the gym, so maybe I'll save it for after the gym. But this is a fragrance that, I mean, it literally feels like you're watching this world kind of grow up around you or be built around you. This beautiful 3D realism of this fragrance is amazing. And my guess is a couple tricks of the trade were kind of used to really sort of ground everything together, literally, to give the trees and the plants and the forest and the grass and those green different shades I was talking about earlier, to really make them feel real and rooted to the ground. One is spice, okay? The use of spice here is extremely important. They used green cardamom, which I think is masterfully crafted, because on one side, cardamom usually offers this cooling spice that feels slightly peppery and camphoraceous at the same time, right? So it's like kind of putting them together, and it also gives off this slightly bitter aspect. So the fragrance feels very bitter and green. There's no sweetness in this until the very end. Okay, so late in the dry down, we're talking 5-6+ hours in, that's where you get a little more of that sweeter vanillic blend that starts to kind of come out of nowhere. There's no vanilla in here, but it does kind of feel like this vanilla boring like dry down starts to come in late in the dry down, but we'll talk about that later. But the cardamom adds this bitterness to it, this bitterness with that camphoraceous kind of glory that it adds. And cardamom also adds this translucence to the fragrance. So it's almost like a translucent spice, okay? Remember I mentioned the incense starts out feeling very oily on your skin, right? And lemony and oily and fresh, right? And the cardamom plays into that beautifully. Imagine like unlit lamp oil or like canola oil or something like that, right? Like imagine there's like a bottle of canola oil being held up between me, you, and the screen. We could probably see each other, but we would be, you know, distorted. It would distort the picture on the other side, and it distorts the view, right? Almost like a refraction of light, okay? That is sort of how the fragrance begins. It's a genius use, in my opinion, of the spice. And it's beautiful. That green cardamom, there's a little bit of basil in here, which makes it feel slightly aromatic, slightly green, slightly aromatic, you know, like there's a little bit of space. It's heavy, but there's space. It's dark, but there's light. There's beautiful contrast in this fragrance for an incense fragrance. And I really think the genius of this fragrance is how it gives you the oily, fresh, lemony incense with these green notes that feel like you're smelling the plants, the leaves, the trees, the bushes, you know, and it's like, you know, it's trying to introduce you to their world, to this imaginary world that's being built up around you. And it's like the plants are trying to teach you, like they're trying to speak to you. They're trying to say something to you, okay? The plants are trying to tell you, look, you can see my leaves and my branches and my bark and the oak moss growing on me. You can see all that. Let me show you what you can't see. Let me show you the part of the plant underneath the ground. Let me show you the roots, the earthy, soily aspects. And there's this penetrating, like moist, almost like this muggy aspect, like being in a swamp. Like it reminds me of my time. You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of a very unfortunate time in my life where I had to be in Louisiana, and there is this penetrating, swampy mugginess to the air, right? It feels very heavy. If you've ever been to Louisiana, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The fragrance reminds me of that clammy, heavy feeling, okay? Which sounds bad, but I love the way it's interpreted here. Not the Louisiana weather, fuck Louisiana. But it's joined by this wood note, which is just kind of increasing in strength as time goes on. So the air feels very heavy and like there's a lot of humidity in the air, okay? And the fragrance, as it dries on your skin, that translucent oil note turns to something like how, almost like adding flour to the gravy mixture solidifies it, right? As this viscous oil note, which I was mentioning earlier, the refraction of light, we can still see each other, but it feels now like you're adding flour to the composition, and it begins to start to solidify, and it begins to feel more like jelly or sap. So think about like tree sap. Think about wounding a tree and the tree sap kind of dripping down, and how initially the tree sap kind of drips down freely, and then it starts to solidify and harden, right? There's a little bit of that imagery while you're wearing this fragrance, and it's no longer see-through. You can't see me anymore as I'm holding that oil out in front of you. It's gaining weight. It's gaining strength, okay? The fragrance basically grows in strength as it sits on your skin, and it feels more and more like a complete forest. Like at first, you just see a couple trees start to kind of pop up here and there. You know what it reminded me of? There's a scene in one of my favorite comedies of all time, Spaceballs, which if you have never watched any of the Mel Brooks movies, just on a side note, I would urge you to watch Blazing Saddles, Spaceballs, The History of the World, Part 1. Just absolutely amazing comedy from back in the day. Young Frankenstein, I love Mel Brooks. But in Spaceballs, there's a part where Mega Maid goes from suck to blow, okay? And all the trees that were sucked off the planet get put back in, and they get put back in perfect lines where they were, right? And it's almost like the forest is being rebuilt. That is the imagery that this kind of gives me here. So It's like seeing the beauty of life like being formed around you. But as the fragrance cooks on your skin, that tree earthy smell starts to become more focused. Like it really starts to focus on the pine note on my skin as the hours start to go by. And you get this oil of frankincense in the start, and then as the fragrance dries down, it becomes more like pine oil. Okay, and that pine oil smell becomes very prominent. It becomes very singular, and you get this kind of woody, coniferous, let's say, piney smell that starts to take over. It's hard to describe. It's hard to just describe a fragrance in general. This is not easy, by the way, doing these videos trying to describe a smell. But the whole job of breaking down a perfume is an absolute bitch. But you know, I feel like with experience you do kind of get better at it. But sometimes, I mean, you're just kind of describing what you smell. Someone else may experience differently. It's all subjective. But to me, this is the twist where I think Vert d'Encens really earns its stripes, because around the 1 hour mark, sometimes less, sometimes more, 1 to 2 hours, the fragrance brings in the second star of the show. So first it's the green, first it's the Vert, then it's the d'Encens. So first it's the green, then it's the incense. And even though the lemony unlit side of the incense, that oily, think of lamp oil like I was talking about earlier, is there from the start. Around the 1 to 2 hour mark is usually when the incense starts to slightly grow smoky on my skin. So like I'm getting it right now. It's absolutely a beautiful incense note. I love incense. It's one of my favorite notes. And it's like the human being being shown like this beautiful creation of life. Trees, moss, grass, bushes, all that stuff, right? And the human goes, yeah, that's great, but I kind of want to burn everything down because we're just destructive bastards, right? And so to me, this is my favorite part of the fragrance, because artistically, you could make the connection of the destructive side of the human being, and you could go deep down the rabbit hole. You're a crazy perfume head, you've done that, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But also, it starts to smell like an amouage, which I love amouage. I love incense. And one of my favorite notes here, you know, they just did a brilliant job, I think, of highlighting this incense note. Because what happens, and what's so fascinating to me, is yes, it smells like the imaginary forest that I mentioned earlier being burnt. But that's only a small part of it, okay? It's like 10 to 20% of the incense. No, because what happens is this frankincense oil that I was describing earlier, it almost feels like the forest has been dipped in this frankincense oil, and instead of going up in smoke like an accelerant, like you know, setting the forest on fire with gasoline, it does the opposite. It almost seems to hamper or dampen the wood's ability to burn, okay? So whilst you sometimes get a hit or a wisp of this incense coming through, it's almost like it starts and then it's put out, okay? The fire is put out. There's like a like the lemony, fresher side of the incense is so obtuse and thick, it does not want to give up the ghost. Doesn't want to go. It just hangs on there. And so you're kind of hoping for more, let's say, incense and more smoke, and it gives you a little bit. It puts the hook out there and kind of reels you in, right? But this is where this heavy Play-Doh, heavy feel comes back around to kind of complete the fragrance. So I mentioned earlier that there is a heliotrope note in here, okay? And it really makes the fragrance feel whole, because heliotrope gives off this almondy Play-Doh-like feel, okay? It almost feels like putty. And here it almost acts like a fire blanket. So while the fragrance is beginning to heat up, literally, it's beginning to sort of feel like you're going to get some smoke come through. Oh, it's beautiful. There's just the right amount of smoke. Little wisps of green tinged incense start to come, and then that Play-Doh-like heliotrope just fire blankets everything and acts as a retardant to keep the fire from starting. And it's almost like the wood is so new in our creation of this forest in our mind that it's green and it cannot burn, okay? That's what it feels like. It feels like the tree is a sapling and the wood is just too green to burn, right? So the dry down is basically this tug of war back and forth between wanting to burn and wanting to burn everything down and appreciating this beautiful creation I talked about, and being unable to burn it for some unknown reason, right? I gave a reason, but who knows why it's not burning, right? The incense also turns slightly creamy into the dry down due to some of the aforementioned notes we discussed. And then deeper into the dry down, I feel like you know, once you become a full-fledged kind of fragrance addict, you get your fragrance addict coin, if you will. Sometimes there are fragrances that when they turn woody, and this fragrance does turn woody into the dry down. Woody can sometimes be like synonymous with boring to some people. They see woody fragrances as just boring. Oh, it's just a boring woody fragrance, same old category of boring woods. This is kind of woods done in the way that I like them. 3D, smoky with layers, different shades of different green. Think about the green on my shirt versus, you know, the green of grass versus the trees, the bushes, so forth and so on. And adding in that slightly resinous dry down. So the fragrance turns pudgy, thick, Play-Doh-y, resinous. Heliotrope is a beautiful note. I love heliotrope. It's a strong note. It can overwhelm, but it's beautiful. So one of the final strangest pieces of this puzzle is boxwood. Boxwood is a note you don't hear very often. You probably will not be seeing, hey, this is not a top 10 boxwood fragrances on my channel. But boxwood is famous because some people say that it smells like cat urine, or specifically old stale urine. So imagine like woods with cat piss on them, and cat piss is known, especially male cat piss, to have that kind of ammonia-like smell, right? This ammonia-like odor. And I think it adds this amazing depth to the fragrance. Someone left me a comment on my Hugo Boss #1 video, which is my favorite honey fragrance of all time, and they were like, Ramsey, pissy honey is not good. And I was like, yes, it is. Pissy honey is amazing. They were like, no, it's not. What are you talking about? I was like, no, it really is. Trust me. So, you know, when you're walking in a forest sometimes and you smell things that you just might not expect, you know what I mean? There's animals in there. The animals do not go to the toilet and flush the toilet, right? They're using the outdoors. And I think the boxwood note is a stroke of brilliance in this fragrance. It adds this depth, it adds this mystery, this unknown, like you're in this, you're smelling parts of the forest that you just weren't expecting. You may have been expecting the bark, the trees, the oak moss, the grass, all of these different notes, right? But the boxwood adds this sort of mystery, this unknown, and you can tell I love this fragrance. This has been a long time coming, this review. Long time. And like most Tom Fords into the dry down, the downside, if you really twisted my arm and made me say, Ramsey, give me a negative, I really couldn't give you much negatives except for the fact that if you wait a long time, we're talking 6 to 8 hours plus, which I usually reapply my fragrances. So, but I do try to test them for long periods of time for this review. Late into the dry down, you almost get this sort of sweetened, spicy vanillic-like smell. It's like a mass appealing vanilla in the dry down. Even though it's not listed in the note listing, I get it. I get this mass appealing vanilla smell into the dry down. Maybe that's the heliotrope changing. Maybe that's the resins blending with the heliotrope, giving off this feel. I don't know, but I can tell you that, you know, that is a very small price to pay for a beautiful composition. So that's kind of my take. I am in love with this scent. I absolutely love it. I think it's one of the best private blends that in recent memory. It's probably, if you go from 2016 to modern times, it's probably one of the best private blends, okay? But this is unfortunately discontinued and hard to find, and I think I've got, how much do I have in here? Yeah, I mean, I probably only used 10% of this, so you can barely see it. And remember, I said that color of the bottle is like a shout out to Halston. Go watch my Halston family portrait if you have not done it. Halston is very underrated, and the house deserves much more love than it gets, and I think if it wasn't for Halston, we wouldn't have Tom Ford. But anyways, that is a ramble for another day. Go Stars, it's game 2 tonight, the Western Conference Finals. So fun times here at Channel Ram. It's Memorial Day here in the United States. Well, it's Memorial Day weekend, I should say. Memorial Day is technically Monday. But yes, it's a beautiful weekend. Enjoy the long weekend if you're in the United States. Hopefully more videos to come this weekend. We'll see how much motivation I have. But as always, cheers. Love you guys, and catch you next time. Bye-bye.